Hey folks, I'm JC from One Shot Adventures, and today I'm going to review another Nordic horror adventure, Vaesen's A Winter's Tale, one of 4 adventures that you can find in its Seasons of Mystery supplement. In this mystery, the investigators receive an exclusive invitation to a grand event that brings together occultists, alchemists, and that sort of folk. It's hosted by a famous count who lives all the way in Russia. Now, things do not turn out as expected, of course, and soon the investigators are going to have to deal with the freezing weather, a series of accidents, and a strange foe pulled from old folklore. The Winter's Tale is what I like to call a cozy adventure. It's a short, very contained adventure that features only a small number of locations, and like most mystery adventures, will be overcome by good investigation, role-playing, and problem-solving. So, does A Winter's Tale deserve time at your table? Well, grab your heaviest coat and get ready for some spoilers, because not only am I going to give you a full review of A Winter's Tale, I'm going to give you GM some tips and tricks on how to run this one like a pro. A Winter's Tale is written by Kiku Puck Harenstam, and you can find it in Seasons of Mystery, an adventure compilation that features 4 adventures that are all loosely connected around a particular season. This one is obviously all about winter. The Winter's Tale is about 19 pages long, and you can easily run it in one session. In fact, I recently played it at a game convention with 5 new players to Vaesen, and we finished it in about 3 hours. But like I'll always remind GMs about investigative mystery adventures, that it's kind of hard to predict exactly how long it will take your group, because players can really roleplay and explore at their own pace. So it may take a little bit longer, but I still bet you'll be able to finish this one in one session. The background of the adventure is this. Miles and miles from St. Petersburg is a roadside inn, Tamsalu Inn. It's a quaint place near a lake, and it was owned by 2 siblings, Axel and Esther Trigg. The inn has been in their family for about 100 years, and it's done pretty well. Now, part of the reason that this inn has done so well is that it's also the home of a domovoi, a dwarf-like spirit named Greyfoot, who protects the inn in exchange for some simple amenities like respect and some porridge. Axel never really believed in fairies or spirits, and he was an ambitious sort. He felt that modernizing the inn, like bringing in gambling and expanding the property, would do better for the family. Esther, his sister, however, was more of a traditionalist. She liked the old ways, and she knew about Greyfoot. In fact, she would leave him warm porridge by the fire every day, something he loved. And in time, Greyfoot became really fond of Esther. And each morning, she would wake up with her hair beautifully braided. One day, however, tragedy struck. Esther suffered a stroke near the pond and died. Greyfoot was distraught. Like, Esther was his favorite, and he knew that without her, Axel would proceed with his plan to modernize the inn, something that he just hated. Angry and upset, Greyfoot unleashed his magic on the inn, causing a series of accidents that would befall the visitors. And this is where the players get involved. Now, I know what you're going to say. Wait. Didn't you say at the start of the video that this was all about the PCs getting an invitation to an event hosted by a count? Yes, and that's true. The adventure begins when the players receive that invitation. It's a really fun invitation too. The count sounds quirky and strange and full of mysteries. I love how he ends the letter with a very dramatic, "All things are connected." My players always just get really excited when they read this letter. Oh, and by the way, if you'd like an authentic, professionally voiced reading of that letter to kick off this adventure, check the link in the description below. I just think there's something fun by having a professional voice actor like read a letter at the start of a Vaesen scenario. So if you think that's cool too, go ahead and download it. So the PCs will pack their bags and head out on the very long trip to St. Petersburg. There they're met by a coachman, Ilya, a surly sort who will take the PCs the rest of the way to the Count in Jamberg. They are even joined by a fellow occultist, a woman named Wilma Alzimt. However, en route to Jamberg, the coach suffers an accident during a terrible winter storm. A wheel is shattered, a horse is hurt, and the coach slides down an embankment. The poor investigators are likely hurt, and their belongings are just scattered everywhere in the snow. And it is freezing. If they don't find shelter, they'll die from exposure.
Yes, I agree. This cold is unnatural, and it's going to kill even me, a Russian. It's probably the work of Morozko, Father Frost. You'd better warn your players.
Fortunately, Ilya the coachman knows a place nearby where they can hole up until the storm subsides, the Tamsalu Inn. And so, trekking their way through the deadly cold, they'll come to the inn, where they'll soon discover that strange accidents are happening. The cold weather is worsening, and the inn's residents are going a little stir-crazy from this isolation. Notably, there's an old runo singer named Karen Karasveka and two very intense monster-hunting brothers, Daniel and Samuel, who I'll talk about in a little bit. So, from this point on in the adventure, A Winter's Tale is a sandbox mystery. The players need to discover the source of the accidents, which is the Domovoi Greyfoot, and appease him. And if they don't, the accidents will grow worse, and without the Domovoi's blessings, the falling temperatures will just kill everybody and doom the inn for good. And so the players have maybe a couple of days to solve this mystery before that tragedy happens. Now, like I said at the beginning of this video, this is a very cozy mystery. There's an inn to explore, a nearby sauna, and some stables. So almost all of the clues will come from exploring these locations and talking to the inn's guests. And because everything is so contained, there aren't actually a lot of clues needed to figure out what's going on here. So constantly interrupting the PCs during their investigation are the series of escalating accidents that will happen. Like most Vaesen adventures, the author gives GMs lots of options to antagonize the players. The accidents will start innocently enough, like a bucket falling on their head as they enter the stables, or a slip down the stairs.
Good morning. It was a little cold in my room last night. Did the fire go out? I was thinking, what?
Things like that. But eventually the accidents will get deadlier, and Greyfoot will get angrier, and he can lure the NPCs out in the cold to just freeze them to death, or destroy all the fires in the place, making it impossible to keep any heat in the inn, which will eventually just kill everybody. And as a GM, you just sort of have to find the right mishap at the right time and know where to place them just to kind of keep the pressure on the players. I will strongly suggest, however, that you introduce a supernatural threat very early on in this adventure. Because don't forget, your players don't realize that the whole adventure takes place at the Tamsalu Inn. They think they really are on a short stopover to this larger adventure that's going to happen with the Count further in Russia that just won't happen. And so if you don't introduce something threatening right away, your players just might not pay as much attention, or they might just try to fast forward through this and leave the place right away. So I introduce this quickly. Soon after the PCs arrive, they'll see a giant portrait of Esther hanging above the hearth. I printed this out, by the way, at Amazon. It's pretty cheap, and I put it on the centerpiece of the table because Esther, even though she's dead, is a centerpiece of the adventure. You can download this too on the link from the description below. Well, when the players notice that portrait, Axel will tell them the sad story about how his sister died, and how it's a little bit of a mystery to him, and he might even suspect foul play. But then he quickly changes the subject and talks about how he wants to modernize the inn. And during that exchange, something happens. Suddenly a candle just flies off and topples off a table, ignites a curtain, and just chaos breaks loose. The monster-hunting brothers who are sitting in the corner stand up and suddenly declare that they've decided there is a ghost haunting the place, but assures everyone they have it under control. So if you do this all at once very early on in the adventure, your players will get sucked into this mystery. They'll know that something angry is happening here, and it's associated with Axel's plan somehow, or maybe Esther's death, and that possibly murder is afoot. So get this across to your players early on, otherwise it's going to be a slow start. The other threat that the PCs face is the winter storm and the steadily dropping temperatures. This is the real threat in the adventure. Like Greyfoot's accidents, although they're a little bit dangerous, they're not going to ever really kill anybody outright, but the freezing temperatures definitely will. The adventure provides some light rules for freezing cold. It's like a slightly modified fear test. But I think for this adventure to work really well, the cold needs to feel more like a threat. So rather than just make this a series of force rolls that I require occasionally, I actually changed the difficulty of those rolls. If the PCs go outside a little bit, like they run between the buildings, I'll make them make a regular force test. But if they go out for more than a minute or two, like they're going to circle the lake or they're going to go explore the woods or head back to their coach, I actually require 2 successes for them to kind of survive that storm. Also, the adventure tells how Father Frost, Morosco, is looming in the woods. I lean into this. If the PCs go outside for more than a minute or two, they'll glimpse Father Frost in the woods, this tall, intimidating figure wearing a blue coat who's shadowing them just on the edge of their vision. And if they stay out in the cold for too long, he'll actually enthrall them. So if they fail that force test to resist the cold, they'll strip their clothes off, sit down on a rock, and start dreaming of perfect holidays while they're actually freezing to death. And if this happens to your players, and obviously the other players will kind of come to their rescue, they will actually fear leaving the inn, and they'll feel very intimidated and surrounded at all times, which I think makes the atmosphere of this adventure just feel a little better. Giving Father Frost this ability will also make a moment later on at the end of the adventure make a little bit more sense, and that's when Ilya the coachman disappears from the inn and the players will find him far out in the woods, naked and dying in the snow.
Wait. Are you saying I die naked and in the snow? Even for Russian horror adventure, that's brutal.
Sorry, Ilya, it's not a great way to go. So through all these dangers, the PCs will have to piece together the clues to learn about Greyfoot and eventually appease him. And owing to the contained nature of this adventure, there aren't a lot of physical clues for the PCs to find. There's that large portrait of Esther on the wall, which will showcase her beautiful and unusual hairstyle. And in her locked room, they'll find a diary, which will tell how she rejected Ilya, who had proposed marriage to her, something that might put the spotlight on Ilya. And in the sauna, the PCs will find these perfectly master-crafted figurines and a silver comb, which Ilya gave her as a proposal present. But she rejected because who needs a comb when you have a magical dwarf who does your hair in the morning? And with these clues, as you can see, it's not going to be enough to figure out this mystery. So what's more important is that the players talk to all the NPCs at the inn. The adventure says how there's a tradition at the Tamsulu Inn, and that every night the visitors gather together by the fire and they tell stories. And through these stories is how the PCs are going to largely figure out the information they need for the mystery. But I'll be honest, I really dislike this approach. First, there are 4 NPCs who tell stories. So your adventure kind of grinds to a halt as you read story after story without a lot of interaction from the players. And the adventure even says you could hand these stories for the players to read aloud themselves, but I still find that just slows everything down a lot. And once you hear those stories, you'll pretty much absolutely figure out the mystery. You'll know which Vaesen it is that's haunting the place and why, and it takes a lot of agency out of the players investigating. And one of the NPCs, the Runo singer Karen, she just basically just spoils everything in her story. So I find this to be a very strange approach to put virtually all the clues in the stories and then just tell them to the players all at once. So when I run A Winter's Tale, I skip story time. I play Karen the Runo singer as an old eccentric, like barely able to speak the same language that the other players can speak, and she can hint at occult things happening, but the PCs don't get anything especially useful out of her without a lot of effort. And the other NPCs will tell their stories, but through role-playing and conversation, not just sitting around by the fire, like spewing them out. For example, Ilya the coachman has a great story about how Father Frost can freeze people to death, but I wait until the temperatures have dropped a lot and somebody in the party actually has almost frozen to death, and then I have them mention it. The two brothers, in contrast, I make very quick to share their view of what's happening at the inn like any chance they can get. After a few accidents have happened, they announce that the inn's haunted by a ghost, and that ghost is Esther, and that they're gonna banish the angry spirit by like digging up her bones and salting them and burning it. You can imagine Greyfoot, the Domovoi, just loves that idea. But the brothers are just way off in their theories here, but their point of view and their exaggerated stories about how they've had so many dealings with the supernatural, it just makes them strong antagonists in the story and kind of sets them up as jerks who always have an answer. So I don't really have them tell stories as much as just arrogantly confront the PCs constantly with like false facts and anecdotes on how they've saved countless inns in their time. And while the PCs are dealing with the strange visitors to the inn, then I play Axel as the constant skeptic. He's always dismissing his guests' theories about the occult, and he just really wants to pull the PCs aside on his plans to modernize the inn.
Yes, I hear what you're saying, that you think my inn is cursed, but I have a theory. Weekly poker tournaments, or dancing girls, or what about the Eris Tour, right here at the Tamsilo Inn? What do you think?
The finale of the adventure happens when the PCs realize that there's a Domovoi here, and they'll lure him out, which they can do with some nice warm porridge by the fire. And like all Vaesen, Greyfoot's like incredibly powerful. He can like lop people's heads off with like a single blow. So it's unlikely he's going to be beaten in a fight unless the PCs know his weaknesses, like a rusty nail through the heart or being tied up with spider webs. But fighting Greyfoot is actually an unlikely ending here because the players will probably realize that he's upset and he just wants to be respected, and he doesn't want Axel to follow through with his plans for modernizing the inn. And so with some really good role-playing, probably some manipulation rolls, the players can convince Axel to abandon his plans. But adding a fun complication to the end of this adventure are those two brothers who take pride in their ability to kill monsters, and so the GM can use these guys at the end of the adventure to just add some surprises and action into the finale. Like when I last ran the adventure, the brothers had kind of stormed out of the inn in anger after an argument with the players, and the PCs, they thought that the brothers like died in the cold, so they forgot about them. And when they summoned Greyfoot, suddenly the brothers come smashing into the room, wielding their guns, like ready to kill everything. And so the players had to quickly subdue the brothers and kind of get them out of the action before they screwed this up and made Greyfoot angrier than ever. It was actually a really nice finale because it had that burst of action followed by really heartfelt role-playing, like some of the best I've ever experienced, where the players pleaded with Greyfoot to show mercy to Axel, and with Axel to quit his plans to like turn the place into, I don't know, Vegas in Russia, and it ended on a really nice note. With Greyfoot appeased, his magic wraps the inn in warmth, and Father Frost is chased away, and then the PCs can continue to that event that they originally thought that they were going to, or as the adventure suggests, announce that the event was canceled and will be held some other time, like see you next year. And that's A Winter's Tale. So what do I think? First off, I'll say that this adventure is for experienced game masters, knowing when to parse out those clues, role-playing various important NPCs, and creating drama from mishaps and freezing weather. Like, that can be a challenge. When I run this adventure, I feel like a train conductor, like carefully arranging and rearranging scenes and players and moving NPCs around so that the players always felt like they had choices and consequences. Now, if you've run a lot of investigative mysteries before, like this won't be a problem for you, but if you haven't, it can be a lot to juggle around. There's just not a deep one attack that you can like throw into the adventure to give the players actions if you find a slow spot. There's just no deep ones to throw at the players in this adventure if you run into a slow spot. But I like the mystery here. A Winter's Tale conveys a real sadness in its tone. Almost all of the characters are sympathetic, except maybe those brothers, and they all have a sad story behind them. The adventure's low-key, but heartfelt, and its lonely location and frigid, freezing weather really reinforce that tone. In fact, if I were to play an RPG with my friends around a fire on a cold night, this might be the adventure I would pick. On the other hand, if my group likes their horror more visceral or pulpy or challenging, this is definitely one I wouldn't pick. This one's more for the role players. If I have one critique of this adventure, it's that it really needed another page or two to flesh out the story a little bit more. For example, it implies that Axel doesn't like Ilya and might even suspect that Ilya was somehow involved in his sister's death. But it doesn't really say how that plays out. Like, does Axel hate Ilya, or is he just mildly annoyed because he felt like he was a poor guy trying to marry his sister? So as a GM, you kind of have to make that up. And I played the two. I liked the latter. They just really didn't like each other. Axel thought maybe Ilya inadvertently caused his sister's death through stress, but didn't think like he murdered her outright. But Ilya would just stay far away from Axel. He'd hide out in the stables, and just the two men didn't want to be near each other. And I thought that feeling just kind of added nicely to the adventure. There are also 3 NPCs that are mentioned in the adventure. They get names, but really no other information about them. It's a cook and her 2 kids. And what do they know about Greyfoot, or the accidents here, or Esther? Like, do they know anything about it? Like, it's really up to the GM to figure that out. I had one of the cook's kids, they kind of imply that maybe she knows about fairies, be a source of clues for the PCs, but I made her really, really, really shy and just hesitant to share anything until the players had spent some time at the inn and earned her trust. And that helped. It added just another NPC for them to interact with. There's also a chapel on the premises, which isn't described at all. And so I actually used that as like a base of operations for the brothers. Like sometimes the brothers would get sick of everybody in the inn and go out to the chapel and hole up there and discuss their crazy plans for ridding the place of their ghost. It wasn't anything really special, but it gave the PCs another location, another reason to kind of go out in the snow and go spy on the brothers when things were getting intense. There's also a lot of implied things going on with the horses in this adventure. Like one of the horses gets hurt during the coach accident, which I think is supposed to slow the players down a little bit. And then the horse can get her hair braided, and then the horses can escape the stables into the cold. So to make my players care a little bit more about that, I actually named one of the horses. Like when Ilya shows up as their coachman, he introduces them to Anya, his wonderful horse. That is just perfect. And Anya is perfect. She's friendly and fast and noble and beautiful. And so the player's really attached to Anya. So when that weird stuff did start happening, like her hair gets braided mysteriously in the night, or suddenly she goes running off into the woods terrified, like they were much more apt to care and chase after her and take care of her. So name your horse and name it Anya. It worked for me. Finally, the adventure spends a lot of time talking about how Vilma, she's the woman that traveled with the PCs on the coach, can do a tarot reading. And the PCs, to pull this off, they have to go back to their coach in the freezing cold to get her tarot deck. And it's a little bit disappointing because the clues that they get from the tarot cards are just like nowhere near as clear or helpful as you'd want them to be. So I did a little twist here. When Vilma does her tarot reading or seance or whatever, like first of all, I put it at the end of the adventure. Like she could only do it at like a certain time of night and she needs her tarot deck. But then once she does it, Greyfoot actually will make his first appearance. Like suddenly the lights will go dark, the wind will blow in, and the windows will freeze up, and then you'll hear him stomping down the stairs yelling, "Where's my porridge?" And this is actually a really good technique to use because a lot of Vaesen adventures have this problem where you don't really know as a game master when to reveal to the players exactly what Vaesen it is that they're dealing with. Like if you reveal it too early, then the players just go immediately into like problem-solving mode on how to defeat that Vaesen and they stop investigating. But if you reveal it too late, then the PCs could be wholly unprepared for that Vaesen and could like die a horrible death because they didn't know what to expect. If you save this scene for the end when the players have largely figured out everything else, then Greyfoot's reveal will feel very natural and dramatic, and the adventure will quickly move into its endgame. And those are all my thoughts and suggestions on A Winter's Tale. If you're a fan of Vaesen's folkloric horror and are looking for a short adventure that tells a really good, sad story, check this adventure out. And if you'd like to use the assets that I made for this adventure, including a VTT map of the inn, the portraits for the missing NPCs, and that portrait of Esther, and that audio introduction for the Count's letter, check the link in the description below. Also, if you want to see more video reviews like this one, don't forget to give me porridge, or better yet, just hit that like and subscribe button. Until next time, I'm JC, and just remember, all things are connected.